Professional boxing is staged in many different venues, and I have fought in plenty of high-profile venues. And you know, there's sometimes a debate, or this conversation goes to what is the best venue in boxing. You know, what is some? You know, sometimes we loved our stadiums, we have loved our arenas. We do love our stadiums and arenas still. But of course, the fan base, and depends who's fighting, also goes a long way, because some fighters bring a fan base that is just so vociferous and so loud. If you have been to Madison Square Garden for some of the Puerto Rican superstars and their biggest fights, the Garden's decibel level is insane. I've been to a Felix Trinidad fight at Madison Square Garden, several Felix Trinidad fights at Madison Square Garden. You're gonna go deaf in there when Trinidad was coming out, or when Trinidad lands a big hook or gets a big knockout. It was insanity. You know, Miguel Cotto started to bring that kind of profile as well to Madison Square Garden during his career. And unfortunately for me, I ended up being the opponent in Madison Square Garden for one of those fights. So who knew that when I was at those Felix Trinidad fights thinking, man, this is a crazy atmosphere, I'd hate to be the opponent for Trinidad, that I would one day be the opponent against all these fans in this kind of atmosphere. Yes, I went through it too, and it was loud in that arena. I mean, I couldn't even feel myself thinking. You know, when you say you can't hear yourself thinking, I couldn't hear myself think. I'm already in a tough fight against a tough opponent, and the crowd is just, they won't stop. The decibel level just kept rising and rising. It was crazy, especially the first few rounds. It was insane. So, obviously, they call Madison Square Garden the most famous arena. It goes way back. It's actually changed addresses a few times, but nonetheless, Madison Square Garden remains. And I think overall, just on the nostalgia feeling, Madison Square Garden is the most famous arena for boxing, and people really, really have a nostalgic love affair with it, because some of the most amazing fights have been there. Back in the old days, you also had the Polo Grounds and Yankee Stadium. New York in general really was a home ground for a major big-time boxing. Some of the biggest fights in the world were happening in some of these stadiums and arenas in New York. So you can't really have a boxing conversation about some of the greatest venues and arenas without just talking about New York in general. Even in modern day, the Barclays Center has hosted some really, really good, terrific fights, and it has started to build its name, at least with the old ownership. Now with the new ownership, I'm not sure. But when we had Provikov as the owner, with Brett Yormark running the show at Brooklyn Boxing, we had a lot of boxing. Now they've changed ownership. I don't know what direction they're going to go. They haven't had so much boxing lately, but Barclays Center had, for a while, become a hotbed of New York boxing. So just in general, New York in general, with all the arenas they've had, obviously I'm going to be a little partial towards it as it's my hometown, but you can't have a conversation about great boxing venues without speaking of New York and its boxing venues in history. To tell you the truth, I fought both in Madison Square Garden and Barclays Center. I've never fought, obviously, in any of the stadiums in New York, but I have fought in some stadiums. I fought in the old Shakhtar Donetsk Stadium, which was state-of-the-art in Ukraine when I beat Vyacheslav Timchenko. A state-of-the-art stadium, incredibly modern. It was being built for the Euro 2012 football/soccer tournament for that summer. And I remember I fought there in April, and the Euro 2012 was that summer. And unfortunately, by the fall, they shot a missile through it, because the whole rebels in Donetsk, there was that whole rebellion in Donetsk, Russian forces, Ukrainian forces. It got really political. But they had built a state-of-the-art airport, a state-of-the-art stadium. They missiled both of them. They no longer exist, even though they just built them at that time. So definitely that was a cool venue to fight in. I was not the home fighter, but the fans in Eastern Europe, at least in Ukraine, they were a little bit, they were calmer. They never got into the fight, so I didn't have to deal with a crazy, crazy atmosphere. In retrospect, they were actually really respectful, but I never let Zinchenko into the fight, so I never let them get out of hand. My favorite arena that I've ever fought in, my favorite fight that I ever fought in, it's not a fight that I remember fondly as the way it happened. It's my second Love Morendo fight. I had the crazy hair situation where they had to get a haircut. I broke my right hand. I barely escaped with my world title by the skin of my teeth. It was just not a good performance, but the walkout in what is now Etihad Stadium, at that time it was called City of Manchester Stadium, where Manchester City plays their football, that was insane. I loved it. It's my favorite walkout of my career. It was a long walkout. I remember I came out to White Zombie, More Human Than Human, which is typically not for me. I came out to mostly hip-hop in my career, but I came out to this White Zombie song. And in reality, actually, now I remember why I came out to White Zombie as I'm thinking it. I was going to come out to a Jay-Z song, but it had a couple of curses in it, and they told me I wasn't allowed to use it because it was over the big loudspeaker in the stadium. So suddenly I had to randomly change my walkout song. And I don't know, this song came up in my head. It was an old song. I knew it. It had been a cool song. I said, you know what? It's a song that they can't complain about as far as lyrics is concerned because it's got no curses. And I came out to White Zombie, More Human Than Human at what is now called the Etihad Stadium. A long ring walk. I had a mask on, if everybody remembers. I had this weird wrestler, a luchador kind of mask on. So I was walking. I had the long braids underneath. And it was just, I got a big reception because I was going to be the next Ricky Hatton opponent if I won that night. So the fans were waiting for my fight. The coolest ring walk I had of my career. As a matter of fact, it was so cool that by the time I got to the ring, I had to remind myself that I'm actually fighting and this is not a party, so I had to kind of get refocused. And I don't know that I really ever got focused in that fight if you look at my performance, But nonetheless, that was my favorite walkout and my favorite venue that I fought in my career. I fought in the MGM Grand a couple of times. That's obviously a stellar venue that has hosted some big fights. I fought in the Staples Center. I didn't main event in the Staples Center, but I fought in the Staples Center, big arena that obviously has a lot of has hosted a lot of big fights and continues to do that. Although now I don't even know if they call it the Staples Center anymore. I think they call it the Crypto.com center or arena or whatever you want to call it. You know where it is. All right, it's in downtown LA, at LA Live. And then the Toyota Center in Houston, that had a really crazy crowd. That was one of the more rough crowds that I fought in front of. Very loud. They were very much into the fight. So Texas also has really good boxing fans. Even if they're not rooting for you, they let you know they're there, So which is as a fighter, that's really all you can ask for. Listen, you can't make everybody happy all the time, but if you got a crowd that's super loud, when you look back, whether they rooted against you or for you, at least from a personal standpoint, I am appreciative of those crowds because they made me feel alive. No matter what it was, you as a fighter, you feel alive when that crowd is loud, man. I mean, and looking back, like I said, whether they were for me or against me, I appreciate loud, super loud arenas. Even Barclays Center when me and Zab Judah fought, or when me and Adrian Broner fought, it was a loud crowd. Those are my hometown crowds. I have fond memories of that. Just vociferous crowds always stand out in my mind. And of course, that City of Manchester Stadium fight. I mean, that was the 57,000 people, and they're all drinking, having a good time. You British fans, you guys know how to watch a fight. You guys always know how to watch a fight. So that was really cool. But yeah, these were some of my favorite arenas, and of course a little breakdown of New York boxing and the arenas in New York boxing. Of course, I'm always going to be partial to New York. It's funny because New York had obviously a lot of great places for boxing matches through the decades and decades. The world's most famous arena, and just all the world-class fights were coming to New York. Fighters from all over the world were coming to New York to compete and ply their trade, But New York also had some good street fight areas too, New York was a rough city, and for a long time, the New York attitude was what it was. That people from outside of New York are like, New Yorkers are so rude. Nah, New Yorkers weren't rude. They just told it to you how it was because time was money. Everything was a rush in New York. So if you're wasting my time or a real New Yorker's time, they were gonna be rude because they were like, yo, stop wasting my time. It's funny because when I would leave New York, I'd see, I lived in LA for 2 years, I remember, and I'd see, I'd be in an elevator, and I wouldn't know the person, and, I'd be in an elevator, and they'd say, how you doing? And at first, it kind of took me back, because now I realize I've traveled the world so much that in a normal place, somebody says, how you doing? You're like, oh, how you doing? As a New Yorker, your first thought is, why is this person talking to me? Because, you don't have any time to waste. You don't have time to strike up a conversation. Your mindset is go, go, go. So New Yorkers get the reputation to be rude, at least the old New Yorkers. Now the new New Yorkers don't even count as New York. If you just moved to New York in the past decade, you're not a New Yorker, bro. All right? New York now is not New York anymore. So no matter what, anybody who tells you, I love New York, I don't care for this New York, okay? It's not New York anymore. But the old New York with the New York attitude, and we had different cultures. Didn't matter what culture you were. We're Hispanic, Black, Italian. We had all of it. One thing we all had in common, we weren't that friendly because New York time is money and don't waste our time. That's it. We were brutally honest and we were blunt. And so the New York attitude obviously caused a lot of fights. I mean, for me in general, I think high school gave me a lot of fights. I got expelled from high school. So the best place to have street fights in New York, I don't know. It could be anywhere. Playing basketball at the park, I got into fights there. High school, I got into fights there. The subway, the MTA. If you just got a YouTube New York City subway fights, I'm sure you'll get a bunch of those too. The subway definitely staged a lot of fights in New York. And I've even been in fights on the subway, so I'm part of that too. Although I don't think anybody recorded it. At least I hope not. But yeah, I'll tell you, nightclubs also staged some good fights, you know. Yeah, that's why they got bouncers, because New York nightclubs had some good fights too. I remember there was a legendary one with like two known street fighters. One of them you guys might know, Chuck Zito. You know, Chuck Zito was in the China Club, you know, and big street fighter. The legend is it lasted like 40 minutes against Joe Patillo, who was a known street fighter, known New York tough guy, you know. Joe Patillo and Chuck Zito. The legend is it lasted 40 minutes. It probably lasted like 5 minutes, you know, and even that's a long street fight, but 40 minutes, I don't know, but they said the bouncers cleared it out and let them fight. I wish I was there. Honestly, I used to go to the China Club a lot when I was younger. I wasn't there that night. The Monday night party at the China Club was fun, though. I missed that party. I wish I would have been there, because I would have liked to see just exactly how long it was, so I can break it down for you here, that I would have, what's legend and what's not legend. But I wasn't there, so I can't tell you how long it really lasted. But New York City, New York, all the 5 boroughs, known for its great fights. Stadium, Yankee Stadium, Polo Grounds, Madison Square Garden, Barclays Center, the Roseland Ballroom, which I also fought in, and probably other places that I'm not even mentioning. New York itself, known as a great fight town.